it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. The Endless River. I inherited my father's cabin after his mysterious disappearance nearly 8 years ago. He'd bought it right after divorcing my mother, and it meant a lot to him. It was a place of peace, sanctuary, and reflection. But how did he vanish, you might ask? Well, I don't know, but I know what took him. The river near our cabin. That cursed river. It sits there day after day, night after night, flowing elegantly between the trees of the forest, masking the true darkness it holds. But I know the truth. I know that it is far from ordinary. Everyone calls me crazy when I tell them about it. My friends, my family, they turn their backs on it. None of them care to even try to get to the bottom of what's going on. Well, this feels like the only place I can get my story out there without being considered another attention-seeking loon. There are times I consider getting my dad's old motorboat and taking a trip downstream, just out of burning and intense curiosity. But trust me, doing that without any sort of preparation almost seemed like a guaranteed way to make sure I disappear too. And it's not because of any current or conditions of the water. No, there's something wrong with that stream. I just know it. Ever since I was sure it was the thing that took my dad, I've been studying it, spending every waking second I could to get some sort of proof that this body of water is not what it appears to be. Well, who's I going to show it to? Beats me. For starters, my dad is not the only one to have gone missing because of this wretched river. And no, I don't have some stack of newspapers detailing a bunch of missing persons cases. Instead, I have my own documentation and reports. Accounts that I've created of people disappearing to wherever the river leads. Believe me when I say I've tried to stop people from going boating or canoeing down that seemingly cursed route, but they never listen. Ignorance is bliss, I guess. So if the police, the FBI, or government won't do anything about it, I will. They can keep pretending it doesn't exist all they want. But for the safety of myself, I won't be giving out any details of where I live or where the river is. I'll also be using made-up code names of individuals I mention for their privacy. Now, the government may look the other way when it comes to the river itself, but I know they'll be extremely giddy to come shut down any attempts to expose their negligence. I'm one man. I don't have the resources to fight back if they were to try anything. I need to make sure I can get this out there to as many people as possible while simultaneously keeping myself under the radar. Well, without further ado, here's what I have gathered so far. Document 1. Jessica Stowe. 22 years old, college student. Jessica had been illegally camping out in the forest near my home with a small group of college peers. Alcohol was present, a bonfire had been lit, and a small-scale party had taken place. It was your typical scenario. The main portion of the campsite had been set up just a few feet from the river, which is about 100 meters wide. Furthermore, the group had seemingly talked about having a normal night. No animal attacks, no strange sounds, or weird phenomena. However, when the group had woken up the next day, Jessica had disappeared. They swept the area to the best of their ability, but found no direct or obvious clues. Well, the police did no better, turning up nothing during 2 days of search efforts. Although I was more than sure they were barely trying anyway. But after a few grieving members of the group had returned to the spot to see if they'd missed anything, they'd found the white gold necklace Jessica had been wearing on the night she disappeared. It had washed up on a nearby riverbank, only a few dozen feet from the original campsite. Well, the necklace itself was of great importance to Jessica. They told me she'd worn it 24/7 and pretty much never took it off, so it was highly unlikely it was done voluntarily. And yet there was no blood or signs indicating the necklace had been removed by force. As much as I wanted to ask for the necklace, well, I knew I couldn't. It would be far too suspicious for what I was masking as a genuine conversation. Once they turned it into the police, no further clues were found from that point on. Several months went by and the investigation was closed. Now, as I've stated before, I know full well the local law enforcement isn't doing their jobs. Well, not how they should, and whether they're being paid or threatened not to. It's no secret at this point to me or anyone. How do I know all this? Because I live here. I talk to people who are involved with these incidents. Obviously keeping it on the more casual side of things, not wanting them to know what I'm really up to. Everyone just decides not to acknowledge or challenge the lack of authorities' effort out of fear of consequences. Maybe they could end up being the next missing person. But, well, I digress. Document 2. George Davis, 35 years old and unemployed. George, from what I gathered, was generally a pretty quiet and peaceful soul. His friend, who I'll call Jared, had spoken to me not long ago. He'd gone on about how he and George had decided to go for a short fishing trip on the river. George had brought along a hunting knife that belonged to his grandfather. It, similar to Jessica's necklace, had a lot of sentimental value to George. When both he and Jared had stayed out into the later hours on the boat trying to catch whatever was biting, both men had fallen asleep. But only Jared awoke. Jared had come to sometime around dawn. He'd seen that George was missing from the boat, but his fishing rod and prized hunting knife had been left behind where he was sitting. The boat itself had been floating near the dead center of the river, despite Jared claiming that it had been closer towards the east side of the stream the previous day. There wasn't a strong current or anything that would have moved it in that time period. Well, not that it's an completely impossible probability by any means. Well, of course, when Jared had attempted to contact the authorities, a similar scenario played out as the previous document's tale. The police found nothing because they were barely looking in the first place, only performing the bare minimum to convince the people that they were doing all they can. Document 3. Caden Waltz, 10 years old and homeschooled. From what his parents had told me, they decided to take a small hike along the river with their son. Caden's father, Nick Waltz, was quite the nature buff. He spontaneously brought them out to the area after convincing his wife it would be a positive bonding experience. After hiking for only 2 hours, the family had encountered an abandoned motorboat resting on one of the riverbanks. Well, curiosity got the best of them, and they decided to explore what else might have been left behind with it. The father, Nick, had told his family to inform him of any weapons or firearms on the boat, not wanting his son or wife to get injured by anything dangerous. Near the back of the boat, Nick retrieved what looked to be a map. A very basic and simplistic brown stained paper with one dark blue wavy line drawn down the middle. At the top, in a poorly handwritten manner, was the sentence, "Follow the stream to become fulfilled." Well, Nick was hesitant to show it to his family at first, thinking it was nothing more than a drawing done by some small child. But the more he fixated on it, the more it seemed to pull him in and intrigue him, as if it was slowly bringing him into a trance of some sort. Caden, who'd given up with searching the boat and proceeded to play with his yo-yo toy not far from his parents, had also become very intrigued about the bare-bones map he'd seen his father inspecting. The yo-yo Caden had been fidgeting with was also of great significance to him, one that his father stated he constantly had with him, almost never let out of his sight. Nonetheless, Nick had snapped out of his state of amazement by the map when his wife had called his name several times. Nick had neglectfully dropped the map to the ground and left his spot to go speak with his wife, not noticing that his son Caden had walked over, picked the map up, and put it in his pocket. Well, the trip went on normally for the remainder of the time, all the way up until a strange smell had started to emerge. It didn't seem to have any direct source. It had practically come out of nowhere, much to the family's dismay. Well, the adults anyway. Nick reported becoming dizzy and lightheaded, losing some of his coordination and possessing the constant feeling of being imbalanced. His wife had complained about a similar condition, and they'd both passed out within minutes. Just before losing consciousness, Nick had reported that Caden was highly concerned and had rushed over to him after he and his wife had collapsed onto the ground. But Caden was showing no signs of being affected by the smell, not in the same way his parents were. When Nick awoke, he went on about how his wife was distressed and highly alarmed. When he went over to comfort and ask her what was wrong, she informed him Caden was gone, completely vanished, with the only trace being his yo-yo that he'd left behind. Cops were called, nothing turned up, and everything seemed hopeless, which seems to be the recurring theme of these unfortunate stories. Now, I know that some of you are left wondering what valued item my father left behind when he was also taken by the river. Well, if it wasn't obvious in the beginning, it's this cabin. Well, not only was it expensive as all hell, but it also represented great belief and independence for Dad. A symbol that he was out of the hellish marriage, his words not mine, with my mum, and a free man. Well, as to how I've spent so much time around the river and not been taken yet beats me, but I've come up with some possible theories. One, it just simply isn't interested in me. I don't hold some great importance or purpose, and it chooses to ignore me. Two, it's waiting for the right time, for the perfect moment. As to why or when that is, I have absolutely no clue. The third, final one, and the most likely option, is that I haven't triggered the particular event or circumstances that caused the disappearance. Well, there are some specific criteria or prompts that activate whatever the heck it is that's taking these people. After polishing up the papers and working tirelessly until nearly 2 in the morning, I was satisfied by what I'd produced thus far and decided I deserved a little reward. I grabbed my jacket, locked up the cabin, and got into my car, taking a trip to one of those 24-hour convenience stores they have in town. Well, the drive wasn't long by any means. I didn't live deep in the middle of nowhere, like one might assume. I was relatively towards the edge of the wilderness. But, I do have to be totally honest here. Driving at night creeps me out, especially when I'm taking back roads or making my way in and out of the forest. Something about it felt so unsettling. This night in particular was extremely quiet. No owls, no crickets, and especially no other cars or people. It was the kind of silence where a pin drop into the floor would startle you. I attempted to turn the radio on just for some extra noise to comfort myself, but every single channel gave me nothing but weird feedback sounds and nonsensical static noise. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," I huffed, leaning over to fidget with the radio. I know, yes, I know. I should have been keeping my eyes on the road. But for the past 8 years, most of my life had been nothing but working and, overthinking, obsessing over something I had very little hard proof of. I needed some sort of way to enjoy myself and let loose every once in a while. So you can imagine why I was being foolishly dramatic. After messing with the radio for a couple of minutes, while simultaneously navigating the road in front of me, nothing worked, so eventually I gave up and switched the whole thing off. But not without letting out an over-exaggerated sigh of bitter frustration to myself. I continued the rest of the trip in eerie silence, made it to the store without incident, grabbed whatever sugary snacks and beverages I could get my hands on, and began the journey back home. The drive back was no better than the original trip, because this time it wasn't just the deafening silence, but also the feeling that I was being followed, watched, and stalked. I tried to chalk it up just to me being irrational, letting my imagination run to places it shouldn't. Well, the feeling of being watched is not so easy to shake. Some people handle it better than others, but when you live alone, you just learn to get used to it. But this time, it felt too strong to ignore, and I couldn't just brush it off. Soon enough, I came to an intersection. When I looked up, the cold, unforgiving darkness of the night stared back at me. And something else as well. In the shadows, I made out the silhouette of a woman standing right in the middle of the empty intersection in my path. Her hair was done in a ponytail, She was neatly dressed in a feminine business suit, her eyes pierced through a pair of prescription glasses. In her hands she held a clipboard, a wide smile creeping upon her face as my headlights engulfed her figure. I slammed on the brakes, my tires screeching obnoxiously against the asphalt of the road. The woman slowly approached my driver's side window, the sounds of her heels clicking as she marched forward, filling my ears. Now that she was out of the way, I tried to hit the gas and go forward. But my car wouldn't budge. I frantically switched to reverse and tried to back up, only to receive the same result. I was stuck with no weapons in the car or anything to defend myself. Well, the woman began calmly tapping on the window, still maintaining that same endearing smile. She was patient. No banging on the glass, no screaming or frantic wailing. She was waiting on me to make a move out of my own free will. And from what I could tell, she was more than willing to do so. With a heavy sigh and hesitant movements, I reached over and cracked the window open just enough to be able to hear her. "Who are you?" I asked immediately, just waiting for her to slip a blade of some sort through the gap. "What do you want? Where did you even come from?" She held a finger to her lips and shushed me, right before slowly reaching into the jacket of her suit to retrieve something. I leaned back as a reflex, preparing for whatever weapon or device she planned to harm me with. Instead, she simply pulled out an envelope, a pristine, completely white one at that, and slipped it through the cracked open window. "What the hell is this?" I inquired, wrapping my fingers around the envelope and pulling it inside. She didn't answer my question. Instead, she simply straightened her posture, turned around, and began to walk away casually into the night, as if she had no time for questions. I stared at the envelope for a few moments, trying to determine what might be in it. I didn't plan to open it. I was mainly attempting to figure out whether or not I was in some sort of nightmare. So many questions raced across my mind. When I looked back, the woman had vanished. Well, I honestly wasn't surprised. After everything that had happened around here in the past 8 years, this almost seemed like something plausible. But I didn't care. I wasn't going to open that frickin' envelope. Instead, I took a few more quick glances around, just to make sure the mysterious woman wasn't watching me. And then, with no hesitation, I rolled down the window a bit more and threw the dang thing out. I put the car back in drive, hit the gas, and it jerked forward. The vehicle was suddenly working again. Well, I didn't sit around and celebrate. I just floored the pedal and got out of there as fast as possible. I could physically feel my fingers shaking on the steering wheel. I was completely unharmed and undamaged, but there was something more to that woman. I just knew it. She might even be connected to the river. I cracked open the Pepsi bottle I'd bought and began to take a swig. The dopamine from the sugar didn't do much to help lighten my dread. When I arrived back at the cabin, I practically sprinted up the stairs to my doorstep, looking all around like some deranged mental patient as I fumbled with my keys. Well, you know that feeling of being watched I mentioned earlier? It was increased tenfold now. Being outside made me feel vulnerable in a way I didn't think was possible. It's almost like I could feel my impending doom. My keys dropped to the ground in the chaos of my haste. I bent over to retrieve them and laid eyes on a sight that froze my blood. There it was, lying there, staring back at me with a faceless but smug expression. The envelope. I didn't take my time. I grabbed the darn thing along with my keys, unlocked the door, and threw myself inside. I took a quick final glance out into the nighttime darkness before slamming the door, making sure to deadbolt it as an extra layer of security. I walked over and placed the envelope on my kitchen counter and just stared. Stared and stared, waiting for something to happen, something horrendous, awful or horrifying. I'm no fool. I know what would happen if I were to try to dispose of it again. It'll just come right back, over and over until I finally opened it. So I did what I felt like was my only choice. hesitantly walking over to the counter and grabbing it once again. I held it out as far in front of me as possible and I turned the flap. Inside was what looked to be a brown piece of paper, and it looked old, far older than anything I'd seen in the past few decades. I retrieved the paper and opened it up. It was stained and beat up, looking like it had been folded and crumpled multiple times over. All sorts of creases and stains were spread across it. In the middle was a blue line, going in a slight zigzag pattern along the vertical dimensions of the paper. At the top, in black ink, was one simple sentence. "Follow the stream to become fulfilled." I quickly put the map back down on the counter, stepping back and taking several deep breaths. Everything in my head told me to deny the reality in front of me, and to laugh it off as nothing more than some sick joke or warped dream. But I knew the truth, and I hated that I did. So I know what must happen. I know what I must do. What was once the unthinkable now seemed like the only logical next step. I had to follow the river. Just thinking of that phrase made my stomach churn. But of course, not without preparation, not without planning or contingency in mind. I knew that I couldn't start that night. I was already mentally and emotionally exhausted from everything I'd endured. I needed to sleep, regroup my emotions, and begin my mission in the morning. It wasn't long before I passed out after collapsing onto my bed, even with the paranoia running through my mind. I couldn't even remember what I dreamed about, which was rare for me. I woke up to the sounds of birds chirping and the sunlight beaming through my bedroom window. Usually it was comforting, relaxing, and made me feel at home. But not today. I forced myself out of bed as I rubbed the morning grog away. I needed to get moving as soon as possible while I had the daylight. The nightmare wasn't going to end until I did something about it. No matter where I went or how far I ran, it would never let me go. I had to face it head on. I'm well aware that I might get injured or worse. But for 8 long years, the question of what this is has been tormenting me, taunting me and never letting me live my life the way I truly wanted. I needed answers, and I wouldn't get them sitting here in this cabin writing up documents about other people's grim fates. So first I put together a homemade gas mask, in case I encountered the airborne substance that created that strange smell. From what the Waltz family's document said, it didn't seem like it was fatal, but I wasn't willing to take a chance on it. Next, I brought a solid oak baseball bat. It was currently my best weapon of defense. I'd never been a very big fan of guns in my life, but that's a story for another time. Third, I brought along a cooler filled with bottles of water and non-perishable foods, in the event that I got stranded or stuck far away from home. I was almost sure that there'd be no signal where I was going. And while you don't need a signal to call the cops, well, I'm sure you're already aware of how I feel about that. Finally, I went into the garage and fished out my dad's old motorboat, checked for any signs of holes or damage that could end with me at the bottom of the river, and patched it all up. As I was working, a car pulled up into my driveway. It was one I'd recognized from before, at least I remembered the person inside of the vehicle. Nick Waltz. He got out, eyeing me as he slowly marched up toward the cabin. Dressed in stained jeans, a pair of brown working boots, a black jacket, and a red baseball cap to top it all off. He approached me with a look of complete and utter disbelief, as if he'd just witnessed something impossible take place right in front of him. "We need to talk," he said surprisingly calmly, considering his expression and posture. "I'm a little busy," I shot back, still looking him in the eyes as I leaned my head into the boat. "No, you don't get it," he went on. "It's about, you know," Nick announced, shooting a glance past me and over toward the river. I perked my head up. Well, I didn't blame him for his more fragile state. He was a grieving father after all, and I was a similar way after what had happened with my dad. although I have a hard time comparing the two. I knew you'd be doing this. Right now, at this exact time. I saw it. I dreamed about it, he told me. I paused, a revelation boiling in my head, knowing there was no possible way he could have figured that out on his own. Did you see her too? I asked. Nick slowly nodded his head. Listen, I know we talked before, so you could get my story. The cops aren't doing their jobs around here. Everyone and their damn mother knows it. I need your help. I just want my son. I want to find my boy. His voice cracked as he said it. I walked over closer and I dropped my tools. Tears were pounding at the back of his eyes as he attempted to keep his composure. What did she say to you? Did she give you anything? I inquired as politely as possible. She told me I needed to follow the stream. She said it's the only way I can find peace. Call me a dummy all you want, but if it means I can fight Caden, I have to try. Even if it's the slimmest chance possible. My wife and I can't take it anymore. The quiet emptiness of our house, walking into his bedroom and seeing his toys all over the floor, knowing he isn't there to ever play with them again. I need him back. I'm telling you, I need him back. I gently wrapped my arms around the distraught man, patting his back as he began to quietly sob on my shoulder. I could feel the warmth of his tears running down the fabric of my shirt. We're going to make this right, I said gently. I promise. I looked back behind Nick. In his car I spotted what looked like a concealed hunting rifle in a case. Now, while I don't like guns, I knew that it was worth bringing, especially since I wasn't going to be the one doing the shooting. I comforted him man to man for a few more moments before Nick was just about able to pull himself together. Not that I was going to rush him. You a good shot with that? I asked, pointing to the rifle in the back seat. Yeah, I hunt pretty regularly. Was planning on taking Caden for his 11th birthday, he confirmed, wiping away the last of his tears. Bring it. I can't shoot, and I need someone who can, I stated, matter-of-factly. I made another one of my homemade gas masks for Nick, stocked up the cooler a little bit more, and he even helped me fix up the boat. Well, I'll be honest and say I'm not sure how effective the mask itself will be, but it was still a worthwhile precaution. Once everything was set in place on that front, it was nearly 3 p.m. Nick helped carry everything we needed down to the riverbank closest to my cabin. He looked at me as we sat down all the equipment, now flashing me a friendly smirk. Hey, I just want to say thank you. If we make it out of this with our hearts beating, I owe you big time, he said gratefully. Another one of those rare instances of me smiling took place as I responded. The only thing you owe me is your happiness when we find your boy. I nodded. We set off not long after, both trying to display looks of confidence at what the situation laid out in front of us. But, well, for once I felt good. Great even. Finally facing down the fear that had taken control of my life for so long. But like that night, when I'd encountered the lady in the business suit, it soon fell silent as the evening moved forward. That same disturbing silence. I could tell Nick was tense. He clutched his rifle tightly as he scanned the trees on either side of us, determined to find some sort of clue or sign for where these people had gone. You see anything? I quizzed while steering the boat forward. Nothing but trees, grass, and rocks. So far it's a dud. Well, just keep looking, I said. I promise we'll come across something. The water itself was calm, bubbling and foaming up as the boat glided elegantly along the surface. Well, despite the fact that we'd been out there for a couple of hours with no results, I still held on to as much hope as I could. For both of us, especially Nick, he was in dire need of it. Watching a grown, presumably hardened man like him cry makes you do a double take. Life can be cruel, No matter who you are or where you come from, everyone has their own struggles and demons to fight. But then, a burning question suddenly hit me like a semi. "Hey, Nick," I grilled. "Yeah?" he replied without turning around. "What would you say is your most prized possession?" He paused, not knowing how to answer at first. "We talking items or people? Big difference." "Just anything you can think of." "Well, then that'd be my family," he huffed bluntly. "My wife and my son." Well, I was wondering because when I was looking over the disappearances, I noticed that everyone who'd vanished left behind something. My sentence was suddenly cut off by the tipping and turning of our boat. Something was shaking and rocking it from below. I quickly peered over, thinking it might have been a current that picked up, but no. It was something else entirely. Something I couldn't see. Nick and I both held on to whatever we could for balance as we were rocked violently from side to side. Whatever was causing the chaos threatened to capsize the boat at the rate it was going at. "What the hell?" Nick shouted as he attempted to grab on to his rifle. I tried to go forward, but nearly lost my balance. I stepped over one of the benches in the cockpit. "What is this?" I exclaimed, holding on to the left side of the boat for dear life as we were thrashed around. When the boat tipped onto its right side while I held the left, I caught a glimpse of a group of figures standing in the forest directly in front of me. They appeared human, or so I thought, and they simply stared at us as we were going through the anarchy. Their only movements consisted of them all raising their right hands and waving slowly in our direction, as if it were a hospitable greeting. "Nick, can you grab the rifle?" I erupted, trying to overpower the disordered noise with my voice. "I'm trying. I can't get a hold of it," he yelled back. And then it came to a halt when whatever was pushing us side to side had had enough and the boat was completely tipped over, sending Nick and I plummeting straight into the river below. The odd thing is, I didn't feel my body break the surface of the water before I blacked out. And when I came to, I was in a field. A simple field of nothing but well-cut grass. That smell of a freshly mowed lawn seeped into my nostrils. I wasn't wet like I thought I'd be. There wasn't a single drop of water on me. "Nick!" I called out. "Nick!" No response. He was nowhere in sight. All I could see was grass in front of me, until a feminine voice from behind caused me to turn around. "You made it." There stood the woman from the night on the road, still dressed the same way, not a single wrinkle in her suit or blemish on her skin, her ponytail still hanging down her back. "You," I growled, now starting to become furious. She held up a hand, signaling for me to calm down, clearly not frightened, but instead apathetic to my threatening tone. "I know you have a lot of questions, sir." "Yeah, you're damn right I have questions. Where's Nick? Where's my—" She put a finger to my lips in order to shush me. "I can assure you that Nick is okay. In fact, he's doing quite all right. He's already living out his fulfillment," she told me with an almost maternal tone. What's that supposed to mean? What even is this? Behind her, I was completely taken aback by the sight of a massive, grandiose, and expensive-looking cabin. It made the one I lived in look like nothing more than a poorly crafted doll's house. "You see, your father has been here. That's what you were going to ask earlier, wasn't it? He's been waiting patiently for you to finally arrive for quite some time now. But now that you're here, you can finally be fulfilled like him. In exchange for something precious, something that holds a lot of value in your life." "And what would that be?" I inquired hesitantly. "Well, your cynicism. And why that, you may ask? Because all your life, you've used it to deny yourself so many opportunities and wonders that existence holds. A web of exciting friendships, romances, and careers. You see your emotional unavailability as a shield to avoid the responsibility of taking on new challenges. But in reality, it's a curse. Not only to you, but to those whom you deeply care for. Most of those who come here need to leave behind a relic of their material lives, regardless of its sentimental value. You have to let go of the issues of the past in order to move on to a bright future. I didn't leave my cynicism behind, I said, using my fingers to create air quotes. Sure you did. And it was the exact moment you agreed to help a grieving father find his son. You were always determined, but that was out of paranoia and even sometimes malice. But today, you were determined out of pure compassion and human decency. You hoped for the best and were sure everything would go your way, that the world was on your side. That's far from what a cynic would think. I stood there dumbfounded. She was right. I've been pretty bitter not only the past 8 years, but all my life. I usually was a person who hated to admit when I was wrong, but this time it felt appropriate to me. Well, if I left that behind, then what did Nick? His wife, she said bluntly. The most important thing to him besides his son. But in due time, I'm sure she will seek him out and join her family in their own paradise. I darted my eyes down to the floor before quickly looking up again, now wanting to ask the most obvious question of all. Is this heaven? The woman simply smiled as she gripped her clipboard, not able to contain her joy. You will have all the answers in due time, but for now, would you like to see your father again? I immediately nodded my head and began to walk over to the grand estate that was the cabin, the luscious grass leading my way as the smell of flowers from the garden engulfed me. The front door swung open, and out stepped the man I thought I'd never, ever see again. Mark, is that you? He stumbled, his teeth showing as his lips curled into a warming grin. Dad, it's me. The river. I followed the river. Immediately he sprinted at me, his body being in much more pristine condition than what it was before he'd originally disappeared. But none of that mattered anymore. We embraced each other as father and son. He practically bear-hugged me and spun me all around, yelling loudly in the emotion of pure and utter amazement. I missed you, Dad, I said softly, barely being able to even contain my own tears. I bet I missed you more, son. Come on inside. I'll get you a coffee. I looked at my father straight in his eyes. It was almost like I could feel the happiness pooling itself up in my chest. Everything I'd truly wanted, what I'd been searching for, was finally here. Yeah, that sounds great, I told him, going in for yet another hug. I turned over to the woman in the suit, flashing her a smile and waving before mouthing the words, "Thank you." Roadkill. I sighed as the first few raindrops splattered against my windshield. Of course it was raining, as if my driving conditions hadn't been bad enough already. Even without the rain, I was by myself, in the middle of absolutely nowhere, at some ungodly hour in the middle of the night. It was because of my grandma that I was here, really. Not that dying had been her fault, but we'd never really been close, so it was just strange that she put me in her will. We lived in different states, so visits were rare. She'd always seemed distant. Well, I'd never been to a funeral before. My parents were already in Montana waiting for me to arrive. I wondered what they were up to right now. I knew I should have stopped at that last little town. As dubious as that motel had looked, it was better than falling asleep at the wheel. Maybe I could just park at the edge of the road and spend the night in my car. I was certainly tired enough to consider it. My eyelids had been drooping for miles, and now the calming patter of the rain and methodical motion of the windshield wipers nearly had me asleep. I'd almost closed my eyes when I spotted something caught in my headlights, startling me out of my stupor. There was something small and furry lying on the road, probably a squirrel. My stomach lurched uncomfortably as the car bumped over the thing. Glancing in my rear view, I saw that I was not the first to run over this poor creature. There was blood spattered all around it, only just now starting to be washed away by the rain. It occurred to me what a pitiful way that would be to go. Just lying in the road, slowly decomposing, your carcass a mild annoyance to drivers passing through. I shivered, despite the stuffiness of the air around me. The quiet seemed almost uncomfortable now, and I turned on the radio in an attempt to dispel it. There weren't many stations I could get out here, and the ones I did have were full of static. I was willing to bet I was out of cell range, too. I left the dial on a fuzzy-sounding jazz station and resigned myself to a boring drive. Soon, the surprise of seeing the roadkill had worn off, and I was nodding again. Hoping against hope, I reached into the bag lying on the seat next to me, groping around for a 5-hour energy drink I had yet to chug. Unsurprisingly, I found nothing. Not quite ready to give up, I dragged the bag onto my lap and started pouring through it, looking down and taking a hand off the wheel to do so. I knew I shouldn't really have, but I could have sworn there was one more somewhere in the... I was interrupted as something hit the hood of the car. My hands flew back to the wheel and the car swerved as I overcorrected its course. My knuckles were sheet white. I put on the brakes and the car skidded to a stop, sliding around on the slick pavement. Shaken, I got out of the car, hoping it wasn't too badly damaged. When I saw the front of the vehicle, however, I nearly shrieked. Not because of the shallow dent on the hood, but because of what had put it there. The severed head of a large raccoon slowly rolled off of my car, trailing blood behind it. It fell to the ground with an audible squelch. Looking back down the road to where I'd hit the thing, I saw the rest of its body, just as mutilated as the squirrel had been. I stared at it for a few seconds, trying not to be sick. Suddenly, a movement caught my eye. There was something else out there, in the forest on one side of the road. I hurriedly got back in my car, now sopping wet. I turned the car back in the direction I'd been going in and hit the gas pedal, eager to get away from the unpleasant mess of roadkill. There were coyotes in Montana, I remembered, and, more rarely, bears. I nervously eyed the rainy darkness around me, wondering what creatures could be lurking out there. It would have to be a pack of coyotes to get the head off a raccoon, a thought that did nothing to comfort me. They couldn't get me if I was in my car, right? I was safe in here, so long as I didn't have to get out of the car again. The next town had to be close, I told myself. I didn't care how sleazy the motel looked, or how sketchy the other occupants. I just wanted off of this road, and away from marauding packs of coyotes, real or imagined. The next 20 or so miles were spent in high alert, but I didn't spot any animals. I did think I saw something moving in the forest a few times, but it was hard to be sure through the rain. I knew it couldn't have been an animal, though, because to keep up with my car on the highway, it would have to have been running at 70 miles an hour. Since this was absolutely ridiculous, I allowed myself to relax a bit. Although, clearly I hadn't relaxed very much, because when my cell phone went off, I nearly jumped out of my skin. Fumbling through my bag, I accepted the call and put it to my ear. Hello? Hi, sweetie. Have you stopped at a hotel yet? It was my mom, calling to check in on me. The reception was awful, but it was nice to know I could get connection at all. No, I'm still driving. Are you guys staying with Grandpa? Still driving? Taylor, it's 2 a.m. You know you shouldn't be out at this hour. She dropped her tone to a concerned whisper, which was more of a hiss through the static. That's when crazy people are on the road. I know, Mum, I know. Look, I'm driving safely, and I haven't seen anyone for miles. Promise me you'll stop at the next chance you get. Yeah, I promise. I wondered for a moment whether I should tell her about the roadkill. It was silly, I knew, but it was kind of creeping me out. Mom, this might sound a little paranoid, but I've been seeing... What? Sorry, cutting out. Her voice was garbled, and it was more interference than words. I sighed. I'll call you back when I get into town, okay? The line went dead, cutting me off halfway through my goodbye. I looked down at my phone. The measly 1 bar had dropped to a taunting, "No service" message. I glared at it, as if my frustration would change anything. Hearing my mum's voice had made me feel as if I wasn't alone, just for a little bit. But now the quiet darkness felt more oppressive than ever. Reluctantly, I stuck the phone back into my pocket. My eyes settled back onto the road. I was already slipping back into the monotony that had consumed my earlier hours. But that was when I saw the deer. It was a huge stag, with magnificent antlers and powerful build. I would have said that it was a gorgeous animal if it hadn't been splayed out in the middle of the highway, inside spilling out of its body, blood seeping out onto the pavement. I barely had time to get my door open before violently throwing up. The way the enormous animal had been dismembered wouldn't let me chalk this one up to roadkill. It had definitely been killed by something very powerful, very frightening and, judging by the steam coming off the stag's corpse, very close. I dragged my sleeve across my mouth to wipe away the bile and shut my door firmly. I was trembling like a leaf in a windstorm. There were mountain lions here, I knew. They had killed people before, when they were desperate enough, and deer too. But didn't they drag their kills away? The stag had just been left here, dismembered but uneaten, in the middle of the road. Whatever had done this, I was not about to stick around long enough to find out. I stomped on the gas pedal, and the car shot away like a firework. I was going about 90 miles an hour, heedless of the pouring rain and the pitch-dark night. All traces of sleepiness were gone now, replaced by a terror-fueled adrenaline that kept my foot glued to the floor. I was almost to the next town, I told myself. Almost there. Almost there. I was going to make it. Well, so long as there were no other cars on the road. At this speed, a crash would be disastrous and fatal. I didn't slow down, though. I was far more frightened by whatever was behind me than what might potentially be ahead. I glanced wildly to either side of me. Terrifying culprits of the roadkill danced through my mind, each more unlikely than the last. A pack of wolves, a bear, an asylum escapee, a serial killer, some unknown, unholy monster waiting in the darkness, the type you'd expect to find hiding under your bed or lurking in your closet. But none of my brain's panic possibilities could have prepared me for what happened next. Somewhere in the road ahead of me, there was a screech of braking tires, then a sickening crunch of metal folding in on itself. I heard a woman's voice scream. Her shriek rose in pitch and volume until it was cut off abruptly. I slowed the car down. A wreck flashed in my headlights. The driver had swerved off the road, judging by the skid marks, and crashed into a ditch. Against my better judgment, I stopped the car. Something large and pale darted in front of my headlights, heading off the road. A creature that size shouldn't have been able to move that quick. My heart caught in my throat. Is anyone out there? The call came from right outside my vehicle. I couldn't see who'd said it. I assumed it was the woman who'd screamed. But getting out of my car was risky. God only knew what might be waiting for me. Please, help me. She sounded like she was in a lot of pain. Oh, that did it for me. I stepped out of the car. She was laying on the pavement, just outside our open door. Well, opened is a strong word. It looked like it had been wrenched off, with deep gouge marks in the metal. Looking down at the woman, I saw similar gashes across her stomach and torso. My stomach turned, but I knew I had to help her. I steeled myself and forced a smile. I'm here to help you. We're going to get you to a hospital. You're going to be all right. From the state of her, I very much doubted she was going to be all right. But telling her that wouldn't help. What did this to you? Her eyes grew wide, showing the whites. Monster, she choked out, followed by bloody spittle. She coughed. Leave me before it comes back. Go. I swallowed hard. So, she knew she was dying. But I couldn't just abandon her, could I? More coughs racked her body, followed by several mouthfuls of blood. Her internal bleeding must have been bad. She didn't have long. I'll give you a ride to the hospital, okay? Where were you coming from? Is it close? She just gave me a sad, bloodied smile. Hold on, I've got you. I opened my car door and half lifted, half dragged the woman into my back seat. Thanks. Her voice was barely a whisper. Won't die alone. I got back into the driver's seat, looking nervously after the creature. I stomped on the gas. God, what the hell was I doing? This was insane. A monster? What had I seen lope away from her wreck? Was she delirious? How much time did she have? Could we possibly make it wherever she'd been driving from? Questions swirled through my head. I ignored them and just drove. We raced along the highway at maximum speed. Her labored breathing told me she was still hanging in there. I heard something ping softly. My gas light was on. It was almost empty. I swore explosively. God, we're almost out of gas. Did you pass any towns on your way that are nearby? I heard her take a strained breath. Close, she managed before coughing weakly. Okay, we could do close. We could make it. I pressed the pedal harder into the floor, racing against not only time and some monster, but the gas tank too. God, things just kept getting better and better, didn't they? We drove in silence, except for the drumming rain and her heavy breaths, becoming more difficult and sporadic by the minute. A ways ahead, perhaps a mile or so, I glimpsed the lights of civilization through the rain. Hey, I see a town. Look, just hang in there, okay? Only a few minutes and you'll be in the hospital, with doctors to take care of you and everything. You'll be all right. We're going to make it. We are. Just as I finished my convoluted message of hope, the car made an ominous sputtering sound and then started to coast. Oh, no. No, no, no. I'd run out of gas. We were screwed. The car closed to a stop. I swear I saw something move in the forest to my right. Okay, look. We're less than a half a mile from the town.
I know we'll be able to make it there. You can just lean on me. I'll carry you, if that's what it's going to take. And I can shout for help when we get closer. It'll only take 10 minutes, okay?
She didn't appear to have the strength to respond. I opened my car door and went around to hers. Her breathing was less laboured now, but extremely shallow. Blood dribbled from her mouth.
Stephanie,
she said softly, surprising me.
Is that your name?
She gave me the slightest nod of her head.
Well, I'm glad I met you, Stephanie. I'm Taylor. We're going to make it, all right?
But her eyes started to glaze over. Stephanie took one last, shuddering breath. She went utterly limp, and the light faded from her eyes. I was left holding a corpse in the rain. I wanted to cry, to collapse into the wet pavement and mourn for one I'd known for barely a few minutes, one who I'd almost convinced myself was going to live. And I think I would have just sat down and given up if it hadn't been for a disturbing noise behind me. I turned round to see, well, I wasn't sure what it was, but my God, it was horrifying. It was pale and immensely tall, even though it was hunched over like a cripple. It had milky white eyes and a gaping, slavering maw, lined with bloodied teeth. Its arms were unnaturally long. They dangled listlessly by its side like an ape's. The thing was on the other side of the road from me, with nothing but faltering raindrops between me and it. It looked like it was grinning at me. I ran. I didn't care where I was going. The forest was probably a bad idea, but I went in anyway. The town was close. I steered towards the artificial light. It was close. We were close. We were going to make it. No, just me now. Stephanie was back there with that thing. She'd been right. It was a monster. So, I was going to make it then. Something crashed into the bushes behind me. It was it. I ran faster. My breath was coming in short gasps from the adrenaline and the exercise. Was I going the right way? Where were the lights from the town? I had to find the lights. The thing was getting closer. I heard it and I felt it. I found myself praying, muttering gibberish under my breath. I wasn't religious. No God would ever let a monstrosity like the one behind me exist. I knew this, but I prayed anyway. Now I could hear its breath. It sounded wet, like the forest around me. Oh God, please don't let me die here. I'm going to make it. Keep it away from me, please. I pleaded with the nothingness. No use, though. The thing was practically on top of me. Something sank into my back. It was wet and sharp. I stumbled and fell face first onto the damp ground. The lights. They must be coming from the town. I saw them. I was close. I would make it. I could imagine getting into the town, finding a hotel, telling someone about all this crazy everything. Confessing, really. Oh, a soft, dry bed. Heat. I could almost feel it. The silky pillowcase against my cheek. The soft sheets wrapping me up, suffusing me with warmth. I smiled softly. I could see the light.
Well, it is relaxing to listen to stories in the pouring rain, isn't it? So, for those of you who are still asleep, thanks for dropping by, giving me a listen. Well, you know I like to make these things a nice round hour, so this end section is very short compared to the normal ones. And here we go, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and Very, very sweet dreams. Bye. Bye. Till next time.